if you had one social worker for every 10 prisoners instead of one guard for every prisoner, you'd have, I think, a more sane society. But I'm getting off on my rant.
Welcome back to the Hudson Valley One podcast. I'm your host, Zach Shaw. With me is the big boy, Geddy Sveikauskas.
Hi there, folks. I think we had a good issue this week, maybe bordering on the spectacular because there were a few interesting stories, I thought. But in honor of that, the spectacular, I'm going to put on my spectacles. Okay.
Yeah, it was a pretty spectacular news week. There's a lot going on. We're going to have Brian Hollander come by, the editor, on the second part to talk a lot about police stories. There was a lot going on in that world. But what would you like to talk about?
Well, I'm just thinking that there are a lot of strong articles, and the reason that they are strong is that we have a good number of editors and reporters and writers.
They're hard to come by.
That if you have 6 to 10 reporters, a couple of really good editors, several really good editors, and me at the top, of course, you can put out an interesting paper.
There's so much to cover. I mean, there's so many places.
That's true. Everybody, you young people are always bothering me. Why don't you do an article on this? Or why don't you do an article like that? Everybody else has it and stuff like that. But, you do what you can with what you have. But what we have is more than what other people have.
It's true.
That is, we have reporters who are good writers and reporters who are good meeting coverers. Mm-hmm. And it's the combination of things that you do within your means that makes the paper work. And, rather than kind of boast about the quality of the two reporters we have, I like to say we got a lot. We have got 6 to 10 each week, and they cover our little world really well. There are some problems, of course. I think I agree with you that we do too much meeting coverage, but in a way that's keeping your hand on the pulse. You've got to do a certain amount of that.
Well, can I just say the trickiest part about these meetings, because I wrote my first article on a Common Council meeting this week, just to wrap up the news, because the Hey Kingston newsletter, which we're running now, check it out at heykingston.com, was going out. So I put that out. And I realized these Common Council meetings are just like the worst in terms of sitting through all the procedural stuff and the...
that's because you don't know the secret.
Well, what's the secret?
The secret is that they meet Monday night, the caucus meets. And since the caucus is if the caucus is more than a majority of the people in office, then you have to have it open by open meetings law. Okay. So if you go Monday night, you don't know what the public reaction will be, but you sure will know what they're worried about, what they're thinking about, what their attitudes are, who's going to win a particular vote and stuff like that. And so that takes place in one of the little conference rooms. And to go there, for a little while, they're a little bit kind of standoffish about whether you have a right to be there or what you're doing, but then they calm down, and you learn interesting things about the city of Kingston.
Because I think there's a lot of people, readers, watchers out there who want to be involved in making a positive change in their community, and there's this huge disconnect between that want and actually participating, even watching a Common Council meeting or attending one, because, as you said, there's all these secrets to how it actually works.
That's true. When there was one of the newly elected aldermen wrote a very touching little piece about what an alderman does, and that's from a distance.
Right.
When you get in there and you know all your colleagues and you do psychological trade-offs all the time, you have particular concerns. There are political alignments within the Democratic Party, so to me, it's telling that there were 9 aldermen elected, and 8 were Democrats. the one who won on the Republican ticket is a Democrat,
Hmm.
and he switched, and he's going to attend the caucus because that's where you have the influence.
Right. And there was a Republican candidate in Ward 9 that received over 200 write-in votes, but was not included on the ballot. So how does that work?
I think that it tried to get on. Well, there are certain requirements. You either do it or you don't.
Hmm.
And I think there was something wrong with, he didn't follow the procedure well enough. So he was on stuff that he was became a write-in candidate. And he got close to 200 votes, which is a good showing, but not spectacular enough to come close to winning.
Right. So getting back to covering these local meetings, which have so much important information, one of the challenges is that there's these ongoing stories, right? In Kingston, we have the Kingstonian development, which a lot of Kingstonians have an opinion on. And just so you know, I've taken an editorial decision to take back the word Kingstonian from the developers and use that to refer to the people who live here. We had that way before they did. They co-opted us.
I noticed they did. There was Kingstonians chime in on a particular thing. No, that's not right. That's not fair. We'll call them Kingstonites.
Wait, it's not fair to take Kingstonian from. They took it from us. They co-opted our culture.
Well, I like the power of Kingstonite because it's so close to kryptonite, which was what Superman had.
I prefer Kingstoners because that really captures
Kingstone. Well, you're Kingstone. I can't help it.
Yes, and we're going to talk about the police later. Thankfully, marijuana is legal now. But for now, I want to talk about these common council meetings because what I found is that the difficulty is every week we report on sort of the little bite-sized piece that happened during that meeting when really people need the larger context. Now, maybe not on the Kingstonian because we all know what that is. But, for example, the good cause eviction law, which lots of places are looking at. It's almost impossible to piece all the pieces together, figure out what needs to happen next, who are the people that need to act, where we need to petition, because I think a lot of tenants around here are looking at January 15th and thinking we're going to have a really bad time when people start getting evicted.
Yeah, well, you have to realize, you don't have to realize, most people don't. You want to realize that the people who do the reporting are often limited. There's some people who are good at seeing the whole picture and regard a particular meeting as merely a sideshow, an amusement, a way to keep in touch with people, but it really and are not capable of pulling the whole thing together in the time allotted, so that we have a certain amount of stuff that you would regard as kind of the cannon fodder, the stuff that happened, that a village board did this or that, and it's a note and that's sufficient. But what you want, and when you really want, say, well, that that little vote was about water, and water quality is a great concern, and there's all kinds of bad chemicals in our water, and it's if you have I think it's if you have more than one bad thing combined in your water, that your odds are that 1 in 1,000 people will die from it, or that life expectancy is reduced. During the COVID epidemic, life expectancy in this country was reduced by 2.5 years. That's incredible. A country of 350 million and a so-called advanced country, there was that kind of death rate, and that's a society we live in, a society that permits people to shoot each other on the street, and if you're a presidential candidate, say that nobody will ever bring you to trial on it.
Right.
And it's just a bunch of irrationality. I think if we were closer to more advanced countries, other advanced countries where there are the government's expenditures is 30-40% of the total, not 15 or 20 that we have, it's a safety net. The safety net provides safety for everybody. Right now, we have prisons where there are as many guards as there are prisoners. What the hell is that? Here's this. Our front page says, rehab, release, repeat. I thought, without seeing it because I didn't have my spectacles on, that had to do with criminal recidivism.
Right.
So people, you fix them, you rehab people, you put them on the straight and narrow, you release them, and they commit another crime. If you had one social worker for every 10 prisoners instead of one guard for every prisoner, you'd have, I think, a more sane society. But I'm getting off on my rant. I don't want to do that.
And yet,
I just want to talk about how wonderful this paper is. All right.
But you report the news every week, so you know how fraught these issues are, how complex they are. Just saying, a social worker for a drug addict, that's not going to solve it. We need to kind of cut the head off at the neck, and have big pharmaceutical companies not be poisoning entire generations with painkillers for profit. The profit motive kind of creeps in and ruins everything in today's modern society. And yes, a lot of people died from COVID, but we weren't on a really good path even before that. Life expectancy was dropping. More young men are committing suicide, dying of overdoses. And it's, I think, just telling, because if people felt more involved, that they had some sort of voice and power within this structure, they would, we could turn things around. But I think everyone's just kind of giving up.
Well, there's a connection, obviously, between the incidence of particular diseases and the role that private industry, as we call it, plays in encouraging bad behaviors or making it more permissible. And there are two ways to deal with that. One, the social worker route is true, and the other way is government controls, which is also true. But it's really a balance between the two that you end up with. Well, I'm just saying that a society that depends so much on putting people in prison doesn't work as well as a society that has a bunch of social workers.
Right, and it's reduced to this kind of knee-jerk emotional reaction where the people who are kind of pro-jail, don't close these jails down, because recently New York announced, surprisingly, they were going to close a bunch of jails down. And they say, well, we want a safer society. We don't want this crime, we don't want criminals like running free. But these people aren't criminals. They're victims of a, post-capitalist, corporate controlled society that values your own pleasure and your own entertainment above all else. And I think, especially in the younger generations, you're seeing that dynamic play out, in very troubling ways. But then again, I am a younger generation to you. So.
Well, let me put in a good word for pleasure and entertainment.
Please, I'm no, I love pleasure and entertainment.
That's what we all do. It's not all we do. We have responsibilities. We have moral codes, etc. But ultimately, Bentham was right. The principle of social obligation is, and controlling behavior is something that we have to pay attention to. We have to give up certain things in order to get more on the other end. And I think it's not that we don't do that, it's just that our balance is completely off.
That's a really good way of putting it.
And happy Veterans Day. We exert we express our appreciation for all the veterans in the audience, and they carry the load that the rest of society is also responsible for. But as with these other things, we kind of let them take an unfair share of the obligation without providing the support.
Yes.
End of advertising. Thank you.
Well, my grandparents both fought really in the heavy parts of World War II, and anytime I have to do something really scary, like go to the dentist today, I think of them and I'm like, this is nothing. They got shot at and they killed people. Yeah. So props to you guys. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
on part 2, we'll be talking about a different area of militarized society, and that would be the police. So stick around for part 2 with Brian Hollander. And we're back for part 2 of the Hudson Valley One podcast. And here with me is editor Brian Hollander. Thanks for coming back.
Zach, thanks for having me.
I want to dig into some of the hard news stories that we had this week. And there was a lot of reporting on police activities. I think the top story, not just in our area, but in many places, this is getting national coverage, is the Monica Goods trial, which is starting to get underway.
That's quite a story, all right, and quite a sad story in the final analysis over here. Of course, the trooper who is accused of chasing a car on the throughway after a stop, which was unsatisfactory to his thinking, allegedly rammed into the car, and the car flipped over, and a little girl who was in the back died. And he's on trial now for murder, and he's been denied bail. That was the upshot this past week. He's got a trial coming up in February. It's part of a sad pattern that we've seen in this country about police incidents, and it's led to all these calls for defunding the police.
Right.
You see that a group like Rise Up Kingston has a complete site on there with a complete program where they talk about things like taking the police out of schools, supporting mental health, mobile crisis intervention that's non-police, but the cries for defunding the police all across the nation are falling. Even in Minneapolis, where the George Floyd incident took place, and voters rejected defunding the police there. What was it that Ellison said? It was a proposal to reform the police, but it was called defunding the police. And Ellison, who was in the House of Representatives before and is now the Attorney General of Minnesota, said, I think allowing this moniker defund the police to ever get out there was not a good thing.
Right.
Because people are reluctant to do it.
Yeah, it makes sense to me. It's kind of a horrible title if you want to actually make change. It's divisive, and there's already so much polarization between the two sides. But it seems to have been doubled down and tripled down by the organized movement to defund the police.
Right, but it is meeting with a lot of deaf ears around in communities when it really comes down to the nitty-gritty. People don't want to defund the police; they want better policing.
Right.
They want, it seems like that you need to have more training, more selectivity in who you choose to be a police officer.
More community outreach,
more community outreach. One of the things that Kingston High School was discussing was revamping their SRO, the police officer in the school. They call him a resource officer. Revamping that program a little bit so that the police officer at least in the middle school would be dressed in like a golf shirt and khakis, and the weapon would be more discreet rather than openly displayed.
Right.
And trying to make sure that it was not an intimidating presence as it is to many minority communities.
My daughter is almost middle school age. And I just recently learned that there are police in the middle schools,
yes.
Armed police, uniformed police. So I asked her, would that make you feel more or less safe in the school? And she said, that makes me feel less safe. And I asked her why. And she said, basically a guy walking around with a gun, and I think that's really, though there is this enormous racism component, which cannot be ignored, there's also just this power that police have of life and death, whether you see it in the Monica Goods case or any case that we've been paying attention to. It's an awesome responsibility that deserves a certain amount of respect, but also needs to be wielded with a certain amount of respect. And I think a lot of people don't feel like that has happened, or at least that's been the cultural sense.
And police officers would say to you about that, they say to you that we face life and death every day out there. You never know what's going to happen. So it is an awesome responsibility. It is something that you can't take lightly. It's something that, you can't just give somebody 6 months of training and push them out there. And I know that there are police agencies that do a lot more training than that. The state troopers do a lot more training than that. But it needs to be looked at as a profession that requires a degree. That maybe you need 4 years of college, of police college, and then an internship and a residency, and so it's almost like a doctor who also faces life and death situations all the time.
Right. So, I guess my question is, when it comes to police and, let's say, activist relations, there are, especially in Kingston, we have Rise Up Kingston, partially funded by the Novo Foundation, which is Peter Buffett's nonprofit, the son of one of the richest people in the world. And so they have a lot of resources, and they have ramped up recently, printing T-shirts, mailers, strong presence at the Monica Goods trial, very clear messaging too. I think they did a great job of breaking down what defund the police means. We have 25% of our city budget goes to the police, according to them. And that's compared to other municipalities of a similar size, that's a larger amount. And certainly we have state police, we have town police, we have, just all sorts of different agencies. DEP, don't call them the fish police, they hate that. And it's just, I think everyone's got this sense of like, we're just spending too much money on this militarized police force that is not sort of addressing the problems that are getting worse, such as opioid addiction, such as mental illness, such as people being evicted, poverty, homelessness. It's an ill-equipped agency to deal with those things, and history proves that. But how do we move forward from that? It's not just taking away the money. Where do we put the money?
Yeah, well, it is. It's instead of taking away the money, the idea is more money. And here in Ulster County, we have a problem with WMC, Westchester Medical Center, pulled out all the mental health facilities and left groups like Family to do them, which has been done before. They've already taken up the mantle and hoisted the load onto their shoulders. But a county without mental health facilities is a very tough road. It's a very tough road to go down.
Right.
You need to have them there. You need to have it available as an adjunct to the police, or separate from the police, or to work with the police. And it's a problem of getting the police more help, more education, more training, more able to deal with diverse situations. And that's where the rubber meets the road.
Right. I've had a lot of not personal experience with the police over the last few years, but there is a house on the corner of my street that the police show up rather frequently to. We have fights break out in the street. A few years ago, we actually had someone turn on all the gas and threaten to blow the house up, and that drew a SWAT team with an armored vehicle and people with long guns surrounding it. It was a multi-hour hostage negotiation, which ended in a peaceful resolution. And I had to say, looking at that, even though it was just this incredibly disproportionate show of force, I was really impressed with the way that they handled that very difficult and dangerous situation. So and there's this perception that the police are prioritizing, militarization and, being, just spending way more money in that direction when they should be focused on these problems that we've discussed. This came to light a few months ago when they were purchasing an armored vehicle, right, for Kingston police. And many Rise Up people and other activists showed up and, had a big presence, and so did law enforcement. And it was just the scene of two sides intimidating each other, sort of. And I felt the same way when I was standing at the Monica Goods protest. The police were circling around the block slowly and like stalking there. And then there was also hired security. It just felt like a toxic, disgusting, like it's just about to get ugly situation. How do we make this better?
No, it's the same. It's the same with politics. It's right. The same with the politics in our system. We're on two opposite sides, and there doesn't seem to be any middle ground to find it. And it's a question of finding that middle ground, which is why we have civilian control, civilian review boards of police, which is why it's basically under the control of the community leaders who have been elected to do that. That's where it starts. That's where it has to come. That's where it has to come together. They have to be able to meet. They have to be able to sit down together. They have to be able to talk about it together. How do we do this? That situation you described with the house on the corner. That's what the police do well.
Right.
And that's what why you don't want to be without them.
And yet they're limited too. I think anyone who's dealt with the police or had to call the police, and I've had to call the police, they're not going to show up in 5 seconds if, let's say, someone's trying to break into the house next door or something like that. They have more important things to deal with or whatever. Maybe their processes are weird and they're not getting out in time. But, they're limited to what they can do legally because they have to show up. There have to be witnesses. There have to be, certain conditions met.
Right.
So.
And that's all part of their training is to how to deal with things like that.
Right.
Which is why you're so shocked when a case like the Monica Goods case, right. Trooper Baldner, and the way that turned out, you think to yourself, that should never happen like that.
No. And when you're wielding that awesome power of life and death, and your adrenaline is pumping, and you're in that moment, I got to imagine that it's very difficult to, kind of walk your mind back from that edge.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it might be built into the sort of culture and the sort of way the police are trained, to kind of. But the assumption is that this was not a approved maneuver, right? That hitting someone at high speeds on the throughway.
That allegation is, it's not the way you would do it.
Right.
You would think somebody would do it. You can think of a lot of different ways. Well, why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? Why didn't he do that? And then you're in the moment and you react correctly or incorrectly, and you're hoping that that's where the instincts and the training takes over. So that's what needs to happen.
Right. And the theme of this podcast so far, throughout the episodes, has been these opposing polarized sides need to talk to each other, need to establish a respectful dialogue and find solutions together. And I don't see that happening. I see a further kind of polarization happening between the two sides.
Well,
so how does this end? I mean,
that's for the leaders of the community. That's why we elect them. And we want them to be able to step in there and manage this situation.
Right. Is that too much to ask, or
it's not too much to ask. It's something that doesn't get talked about a lot when they're actually campaigning for office.
Right.
But it's like getting a bucket of cold water thrown on you when you find out the reality of the situation that you have to deal with it.
I mean, I can put myself in the shoes of the activists and say, hell yeah, I don't want to talk to this person. I'm just going to fight to do what I need to do to get, this situation addressed. And then from a police perspective, same thing. I don't need to engage with these, people screaming at the top of their lungs. They don't know what I have to go through to do my job.
It's another one of those situations where there is right on both sides.
Yes.
Where they're correct on both sides. And And what has to be done is clear in front of you, but getting it done is a difficult task.
And politicians straddle that difficult line between being the sort of technicians within the government, knowing the rules and the Byzantine procedures to get things done, knowing the weird cliques and power structures that exist within that.
Yeah, well, that's another profession, being an elected official that could use a bit more training.
Did you hear about the? I don't know if it was Virginia, but it was a big upset in the election where a truck driver beat out an established Democratic politician.
Yeah, I heard
and
something about that.
They did an interview. They asked him, what are you going to do when you go into the the chambers first thing? And he said, I don't know. They're gonna tell me what to do, and I'm gonna do it. Just had no idea. And I was like, okay, is that the way politics works?
It's a difficult thing, There are tracts that have been written about how to do it. How do you run a government? But there's no official courses and there's no degrees that are given. I mean, poli-sci degrees are given, but those people are usually going into journalism.
Right. Yeah, different set of skills for politicians.
Yeah.
Well, so to wrap it all up on this police topic, there's people out there who are on both sides, and they're watching right now. What can they do to sort of, move this whole thing forward so we don't have people being, allegedly run off the road and murdered, and we don't have the police sort of withdrawing from their duties in order to protect the area. I mean,
reach out. That's the key. Talk to each other. Reach out. No matter how futile it seems sometimes, with people getting angry on both sides of the question, keep reaching out. Keep talking. After the George Floyd debacle, New York put out a mandate for all police departments to take a look at their procedures and to rewrite their procedures and talk about this stuff. And some communities did it. I know Woodstock did it. They gave deadlines, and I think many communities worked on it, and I don't know how far they've come on it, and how seriously it's taken. But you have to keep doing it over and over and over again. You have to teach the lessons that are so difficult to learn from the George Floyd incident, from this incident. You have to teach those lessons. You have to urge people to stay calm and do their work in a clear-headed fashion.
Hard to do when crazy stuff like this is happening.
Yeah, it's hard to do it on the spur of the moment.
We're all human beings with flaws and strengths, and unless we come together to talk and read the news to be informed on what's going on.
Yeah, you got to read the news.
Well, thanks, Brian. I guess I just want to end by saying, I'm not an oppressed minority. I have a certain amount of privilege as a white male. I'm not oblivious to that. So, I would, on this subject, let people who know way more about this talk, and certainly we should have guests on who can provide those perspectives. So just want to make that note.
We should.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for being included in the podcast so far. And we've got more great episodes coming to you. We're going to start having new guests and lots of appearances by our staff here, a lot of behind the scenes. So thanks, Brian, for doing another great episode.
All right. Thanks, Zach.
And we'll catch you next time on the Hudson Valley One podcast.